That morning, a thick fog blanketed the winding forest road, casting a veil between the world of humans and the wild. Evelyn Hart, a seasoned wildlife researcher, was no stranger to solitude or the unexpected, but nothing had ever prepared her for this. Curled up on the roadside was a tiny shepherd puppy, barely 2 months old, its fur damp and heavy, pale blue eyes quietly gazing at her not with fear, but as if waiting for something gentle. And then, from the underbrush, a wild figure emerged, a bobcat, silent as shadow. But instead of attacking, it did something no one would have expected. In that fleeting moment, a journey began, one that defied every instinct and rewrote the rules of nature with something far older than fear, the language of interspecies love. That morning was colder than most. The wind cut through the forest like invisible blades, and the snow piled up to Rey Callahan's knees. He was no stranger to Alaskan winters, but something in the air made him pause mid-trail. Tracks neither deer nor wolf pressed deep into the fresh snow, slow and erratic. Something was losing strength. He knelt, his weathered fingers tracing the blurred indentations. Bobcat, a female. Rey could tell the difference. The steps were usually lighter, more deliberate, but these dragged as if each one was a struggle. Whether it was instinct or something unspoken, he followed. Nearly a mile through the hushed white woods, and there she was. Thin, matted with mud and frost, her belly swollen with unborn life. She lay beneath the shadow of an old spruce, panting, her amber eyes dull from exhaustion but still fixed on him. Rey didn't approach. He knew the line between survival and wild instinct was paper thin. Instead, he quietly slipped off his pack, pulled out a rabbit he had trapped that morning. With trembling hands, he peeled back the skin to expose the raw meat, then placed it a few feet from the bobcat. Not a word. "Up to you," he muttered softly. "I won't come closer." The bobcat didn't move, but her gaze silent and deep followed his every motion. As Rey turned to leave, he didn't look back. But he knew something had begun, something that transcended hunter and prey, something more fragile than words, but stronger than instinct. The next afternoon, Rey returned. The rabbit was gone, but without a trace. No blood, no fur left behind. Only faint slide marks in the snow, as if the animal had taken the offering quietly, cautiously. Rey didn't see the bobcat, but he knew she was still nearby. Out here, in the depths of the forest, nothing truly disappears. He set down his pack, glanced around, and then did something he'd never done in all his decades in Alaska. He built a shelter. Just a simple lean-to, nestled against the base of an old pine, using spruce boughs, stones, and dry moss. Not grand, not fortified, just enough to cut the wind, enough to ease the skin-splitting cold. He didn't bring her to his home. He didn't tie her down. Everything remained open. "Not a cage," Rey murmured as he placed the final branch. "Just a resting place." When it was done, he stepped back a good distance, left another rabbit at the shelter's entrance, and settled onto a snow-covered rock to wait quiet, still. The sky dimmed toward evening. The wind whispered through the trees. And then she appeared, slowly, cautiously, step by deliberate step. She paused at the meat, eyes flicking toward where Rey sat. Then, without haste, she carried the rabbit into the shelter. Rey said nothing, only gave a small notice if two strangers had sealed an unspoken agreement through a glance. In his heart, he gave her a name. Lunaphore, the silver patch in her fur that shimmered in the evening light like moonlight on snow. This was not taming, not rescue. It was a quiet consent between two solitary soul-sown human, two familiar with loss, and one wild creature wagering everything to protect what had not yet been born. The days that followed passed in quiet repetition. Each morning, Rey returned to the forest with a fresh rabbit, a few dry logs, and the same steady gaze for the creature he dared not bind with words or labels. Luna began to eat even while he was there, not approaching, but no longer hiding. Her amber gold eyes still watched him, but without fear. The distance between them did not shorten it, simply changed in meaning, from suspicion to mutual respect. One morning, as light snow fell, Rey arrived to find new tracks near the shelter. Larger prints. Not bear, not wolf. A male bobcat broad, solid, with thick fur and black ear tufts like curved daggers. He stood at the forest's edge, several yards away, watching Rey without blinking. Rey didn't move closer. He simply nodded an acknowledgement between two beings carved by the same wilderness. The male didn't run, didn't growl. He stood silently, a shadow of the woods, and then vanished into the trees as if he had never been there. After that day, Rey would occasionally glimpse him again lingering far off, leaving tracks behind, or a dead squirrel placed near Luna's shelter. An instinctual offering, perhaps his own way of protecting what was soon to arrive. Rey named him Atlas not for his strength, but for the way he stood, as if bearing the weight of an invisible world across his shoulders, much like Rey himself once upon a time. Blizzards still swept across the landscape from time to time, blanketing everything in white, but the shelter held firm, and Luna endured. Each day, her coat gleamed brighter, her eyes grew clearer, and her belly heavier with life. No one said a word, but all of them, Rey, Luna, and even Atlas, knew something new was drawing near. One February morning, when Rey returned to the familiar shelter, he found it empty. Luna was gone. No signs of struggle. Just a disturbed bed of moss, a few stray tufts of fur, and an unusual silence that filled the air. It didn't feel like death. It felt like an intentional departure. Rey scanned the forest. Snow from the night before still blanketed the ground, but faint tracks led uphill toward a cluster of large rocks he had visited once before. And then he heard it. A delicate cry, high and thin, like the sound of life brushing against the edge of the world. He held his breath and approached slowly, until he reached the edge of a natural stone crevice sheltered from wind, gently lit by slivers of sunlight. Inside lay Luna, eyes half closed, her body exhausted but peaceful. Three tiny beings, still damp with birth, nestled at her belly. Two matched her tawny coat. One was darker, quieter. All three were breathing. Rey stepped back. He said nothing. He didn't intrude. He simply built a windbreak, using tarp and pine branches, just enough to shield the den from the chill. He placed his last rabbit outside the entrance, then sat nearby, an invisible guardian at the door. That evening, Atlas appeared. He didn't approach, didn't growl. He laid down a dead squirrel, then disappeared like smoke, as if he too understood. This was the time for silence and protection. In the days that followed, Rey returned each morning, never too close, only watching through his binoculars, witnessing the kittens slowly open their eyes, tumble in clumsy steps, and occasionally nibble at their mother's tail before falling over. Luna no longer watched him with wariness. Instead, it was as if she knew this man would never cross a line. Between them, no words were needed. Just trust, quiet, unspoken, and immense. A family had formed, not in the human sense, but in the language of the wild, through survival, through just enough distance, and through the shared instinct never to abandon each other. By late March, patches of snow had begun to melt, revealing damp earth and fresh tracks that didn't belong to Rey, nor to any creature he recognized. They were boot prints, clear, heavy, and stopping right at the entrance to Luna's den. An orange surveyor's ribbon hung from a nearby branch. It wasn't marking life, it was a signal of death. In hunting circles, it meant only one thing: we'll be back. Rey understood instantly. Someone had found Luna, and they would return with rifles and greed. The next morning, Rey didn't carry food. He carried his own rifle, untouched for years but cleaned, a bag filled with maps, documents, and wildlife protection laws. When he arrived, 3 men were already there, standing less than 60 meters from the den. One was Tim Caldwell, a local cattle rancher. Beside him was his brother Roy, and a stranger young, dressed in expensive hunting gear, with a gaze that held no connection to this land. "They should be back soon," Roy said, hand resting along his rifle. "The mother's busy with the kits. She won't get far." Rey stepped out from the trees, making no effort to hide. His voice was steady as the forest itself. "Afternoon, gentlemen." The three turned. Tim tried to smile. "Rey Callahan. Didn't expect to see you out here." "This is my usual trail," Rey replied, his eyes never leaving their weapons. "Hunting season's over, isn't it?" The stranger frowned. "We're just checking things out. Heard some reports of wildcats threatening livestock." "Caldwell's raise cattle, not sheep," Rey said flatly. "That bobcat in there weighs barely 25 pounds, soaking wet. She eats rabbits. Her kits are just weeks old still, learning to walk. What exactly are you hoping to take from them?" Tim fell silent. Roy looked away. Rey opened his bag and pulled out a laminated copy of federal wildlife law. "Nursing wild animals are under full protection. Killing them can cost up to 50 grand in jail time." The young man hesitated. "No one told me this was a research site." "I've logged over 100 hours observing them," Rey cut in, voice sharp. "I'm no biologist, but I've documented enough to invoke the law." Wind swept through the clearing, stirring dry leaves. Tim was the first to lower his rifle. "Heard about a mountain lion up near Miller Creek. Maybe that's what took Jensen's calves." "That'd make more sense," Rey nodded. "Those cats actually threaten cattle." After a few tense but cooling exchanges, the hunters withdrew. Rey watched until their silhouettes vanished between the trees. Behind him, Luna appeared at the den's mouth, amber eyes fixed on him. Her kits tumbled behind her, unaware how close death had crept. Rey exhaled. Relief brief, but real. Yet he knew. The threat of man never truly disappears. And now more than ever, he would have to stay vigilant. April arrived with the sound of thawing streams and fresh green shoots peeking through melting snow. It was also when the three young bobcats began leaving the den each day, taking wobbly steps beside Luna toward the edge of the clearing. Rey still came. He brought less food now, stood farther away, spoke less. No longer a helper, he had become a quiet witness, like a spruce tree on the hillside. Present, but uninvolved. Luna taught her kits by leading, not speaking, only by example. Some days, Rey saw her coax one to climb a boulder and stand still in the wind, learning to scent the world. Other days, the family disappeared for hours, only to return with a small rabbit dangling from a tiny mouth. They learned quickly, and they grew even faster. One early morning, when Rey arrived, the stone den was empty. No soft cries, no fresh tracks. Only the bedding moss, pulled out in strands like a silent sign of deliberate departure. He walked the area, searching for any trace, and he found it. 4 sets of prints, 3 larger, 1 smaller leading northward, into the deeper forest, away from man. Rey sat on his usual rock, resting his hand on his knee, saying nothing. He wasn't sad, not shocked, only filled with a hollow stillness, like when a long winter ends and you suddenly find no reason to light the fire each morning. But he understood. Luna was a bobcat. Her young were bobcats. Not pets, not companions. They were wild, and the forest was where they belonged. He didn't call after them, didn't try to hold them back. He only whispered silently in his heart, "Go, and live your wild life fully, the way you were born to." And from that day forward, Rey began to relearn an old truth. That true love sometimes isn't about holding on, but knowing when to let go. October arrived, and the forest blazed with color. Maple leaves burned red like embers. The first winter winds began slicing through skin like fine blades. Rey was splitting wood beside his cabin, his axe stroke steady like his own breathing. He heard it before he saw it. A call short, low, the distinct cry of a grown bobcat. Rey set the axe down and turned toward the trees. Luna stood there, at the edge between shadow and late autumn sun. She wasn't alone. 3 bobcats stood beside her, large, strong like echoes stretching from that first meeting in the snow. Each one bore traces of Luna, but also held a spirit all their own. One with a golden tint, one with bold, dark spots, and the last cloaked in that same moon-silver fur. They didn't approach, nor did they retreat. They just stood there, quiet, close enough for Rey to see their eyes, far enough to preserve an unspoken boundary. Rey didn't speak. He didn't move forward. He simply stood tall, arms by his sides, meeting gaze with gaze. It felt like something immense was happening, but it needed no explanation. A return, a rare moment in a wild life where memory had not been forgotten. Luna held his eyes for a few more seconds. Then she turned and walked gently back into the woods. The 3 followed step by step, without hurry, like a ritual. When the last shadow slipped beyond the pines, Rey lifted his face to the sky. No tears came, but something soft cracked open inside, like a thin layer of ice melting under the first winter sun. Not everyone gets to witness the result of the kindness they once gave. But today, he had. The next morning, the forest was quieter than usual. No soft steps rustled the underbrush. No silent eyes watched from beneath the trees. Luna was gone. All 3 of her young ones, too. No footprints left behind, no parting glance. Rey stepped out onto the porch, a cup of hot tea cradled in his hands. Snowflakes drifted onto the cabin roof, melting instantly against the warm wood. The sky above held a pale blue hue. Winter had returned in full. He began his day as always. Checked his traps, split firewood, repaired the chicken coop roof. The same routines he had followed for 20 years in this secluded life. But something had shifted. Not in his hands, not in the cabin, but in the way he looked at the sky, the way he laid each trap more gently, in every step, no longer as heavy as winter's past. One encounter had changed the season. A bobcat untouched, never tamid, left the deepest mark on his life. No words had been spoken, no language needed. Just one decision not to turn away, when another being lay dying in the snow. And that simple act opened a path between 2 worlds that had never crossed before. Rey never told the story. He didn't write it in a journal, didn't take photos. He simply kept it like a soft patch of earth in his heart, so that one day, if something needed to grow, it would have a place.